Look in, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have a very serious one. You can be, of course, playing video games right now for the next 15 minutes, or you can pay attention and really understand what's happening on the geopolitical scene, and, of course, understand where the markets are headed. And a little bit of a personal story today, so stick with me today throughout the entire video, girls and boys, and you'll hear some really interesting stuff to where the markets are headed, about the sentiment, about everything. Real quick before we get started, don't forget to subscribe right there. Patreon.com underscore Greg / Greg underscore Ori underscore H. That's how you find this Patreon. You can now, for $10 a month, subscribe and be aware of everything that is going on, all the news, and of course, find your way to the academy, the one-on-one academy. But all about that a little bit later. Right now, we want to focus on what's going on and what was the latest from Fox News, or rather, what was the latest from Trump about where and what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. And let's check this out real quick, what Trump and Fox News have been reporting literally 3 hours ago.
And those are some questions being answered there from President Trump. Once again, that was yesterday. From reporters as he was speaking on Iran. Now, this just coming in here from President Trump. Let's read it to you again, because we're going to bring in our expert here to really talk about what all this means. Saying, assuming Iran agrees to give what has been agreed to, which is perhaps a big assumption, the already legendary Epic Fury will be at an end, and the highly effective blockade will allow the Hormuz Strait to be open to all, including Iran. If they don't agree, the bombing starts, and it will be, sadly, at a much higher level and intensity than it was before. Now, before we get to this interview, I also wanted to share this here with you. President Trump saying yesterday that Project Freedom, which is that U.S. effort to secure ship movement through the Strait of Hormuz, will be paused temporarily following what he described in that Truth Social post that we shared with you earlier as significant progress towards a potential agreement with Iran. When we also know that Pakistan's prime minister saying today that he is, quote, grateful to President Trump for his courageous leadership and timely announcement regarding the pause in Project Freedom in the Strait of Hormuz. A lot to talk about here. Let's bring in Ben Cohen with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for joining us here, as always. We appreciate it.
Good morning, Christy. Good to be with you.
I want to start with this post here from President Trump, and let's see if we can just get that back up here, because we were hearing from the president just a short time ago on Iran. This is what he had to say. I read it before I brought you in here. Wanted to get your reaction to what he's saying here. Bombing starts if Iran does not agree to a deal.
Well, I think the key words here are a big assumption because, and it's good to see President Trump acknowledging that the Iranians are very slippery to negotiate with. They make promises which they then rapidly break. And I think if you look at the package of measures that's being proposed, or reportedly at least proposed in this deal, there are many areas where the Iranians are going to have to make big concessions that they haven't made before. So for that reason, it is a big assumption. I think one of the calculations that the administration is making is while the Strait of Hormuz is keeping the oil price in a very delicate stage, and we're seeing troughs and peaks with the oil price, and the oil price is obviously impacting on Western consumers. This goes both ways, and Iran has been losing something like $450 million a day because of this blockade. And, you know, that is a lot of money for any country to lose, but it's particularly a country that is weighed down by sanctions and that is dependent on this kind of semi-illicit oil trade with countries like China in order to keep its revenues flowing. So I think that is why, because of that economic pressure on Iran, that's why Trump is sounding slightly hopeful that there might be a breakthrough here that we haven't seen before.
And Ben, I'm just going to keep referencing this social media post that did just come out here from President Trump. There's a couple key things that the president says here that I really wanted to touch on. And the first one being, he says, assuming Iran agrees to give what has been agreed to, which is perhaps a big assumption, the already legendary Epic Fury will be at an end. Let's talk about what we exactly know at this time about the progress being made towards this potential deal with Iran. President Trump saying that's a big assumption if they agree to it. What are those sticking points from Iran?
So, look, if you remember 10 years ago, the U.S. negotiated a nuclear deal with the Iranians that Trump pulled out of. And that deal only focused on the nuclear file. My understanding is that what's being negotiated right now is much broader. So as well as the nuclear file, there are also measures on ballistic missile restrictions and Iran basically ending its power projection in the region, ending its support for terrorist proxies like Hezbollah in Yemen, like the Houthis in Hezbollah in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza. So you've got a much wider ranging package of measures there. I think one of the key stumbling blocks, if not the main stumbling block, will be the nuclear issue. And that's not quite clear what exactly is being proposed at this moment. But what I understand is that there's talk of a moratorium on uranium enrichment. whether the Iranians would be prepared to accept any moratorium, you'd have to ask them. But the American side is talking about, say, a 20-year moratorium on uranium enrichment. And I think that they're also resisting the idea of a sunset clause. In other words, that there will be we'll reach a certain point in time where these restrictions no longer apply. That was the case with the 2015 deal. I think that's something they would want to avoid repeating now. And then, of course, you've got the issue of the enriched uranium stocks that Iran currently has. We know that there are about 40 kilograms of enriched uranium in the tunnels near its nuclear research facility at Isfahan. Trump, throughout this conflict since it began on February the 28th, Trump has talked about the need for Iran to hand over this stockpile of enriched uranium. Nothing from the Iranians suggests that they would be willing to do that. And then finally, you of course have the idea that has been circulating for quite some time now, that the Iranians would have to submit to rapid inspections from the International Atomic Energy Agency, and they would be required to open their nuclear facilities comprehensively without any warning. And again, it's not something they've ever agreed to before. And I think that's why Trump is saying it's a big assumption if they'll agree now.
Yeah, and do we really have a timeline on when we can expect more information on this come out? Because we've seen President Trump give deadlines to Iran in the past. Do we have a timeline on this one, or is this just President Trump putting this out there now, issuing this new threat? The bombing will start again if Iran does not agree to this deal.
Well, again, what I'm seeing reported is that Iran has, I think, 2 days to respond to this deal. And for the duration of those 2 days, that the guiding operation that Secretary Rubio was talking about yesterday, essentially bringing these ships through the Strait of Hormuz, that will be suspended. So I think what Washington wants, what the administration wants, is for the Iranians to see this and for the world to see this as some kind of goodwill gesture ahead of the negotiations. Again, the Iranians have never responded to gestures like this positively before. So this will be very interesting to see whether now this combination of economic pressure, the hemorrhaging of oil revenues, as I said, something like 450 million a day, added to the amount of destruction that the Iranian military and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps have sustained in 6 weeks of war, it's possible that there might be some kind of a change here.
And let's reference this post here from President Trump once again. For viewers just tuning in, President Trump shared this to social media, threatening that bombing starts if Iran does not agree to this deal. What could that look like, Ben, when he's saying this threat that bombing is going to start again? And he actually, to just quote him directly, he says, if they don't agree, the bombing starts, and it will be, sadly, at a much higher level and intensity than it was before. What does that mean?
Well, I think that means that the nuclear facilities, there'll be a much greater focus on the nuclear facilities, or at least those that that we remain concerned about. I mean, already look, Fordow, Natanz, that 2 of their key nuclear facilities have been largely destroyed. You still have this facility, this research facility that they are developing under a mountain called Pickaxe Mountain near Tehran, and that would need, if it was indeed even possible, some kind of bunker busting heavy ordnance bomb to get through to that. I think as well that they would focus perhaps more on the machinery of repression that the Iranians have. The Basij militia, for example, which, is infamous for repressing protests, the most recent protests, of course, that we saw in January. And I think as well, targeting even further regime figures. A lot of key regime figures have already been eliminated. And I think Trump has made no secret of the fact that, if they fail to come to a deal, he will go for that decapitation strategy again.
I want to talk about Project Freedom in the Strait of Hormuz. And once again, this is courtesy of Marine Traffic. These are the vessels, those colored docks on the screen there, just for a reference point for our viewers. But let's talk about Project Freedom, because President Trump says it's being paused due to progress with Iran. But the U.S. is pausing ship escort operations, but notably keeping that blockade in place. How do you interpret that dual strategy? And really, how significant is that move diplomatically when it comes to the signal it's sending to Tehran?
Well, I think, look, this is something that, as I said, this is, I think, going to be portrayed as a goodwill gesture towards the Iranians. The idea that we can negotiate in good faith, and that the measures that the U.S. is taking in the Strait of Hormuz now, it's a recognition that those are actually very tough, very harsh, and will release some of that pressure on Tehran while they consider the negotiations. So I think to cultivate Trump beating over this matter. Of course, the UAE just yesterday was the target of Iranian missiles, and the UAE has taken quite a beating over this this last 6 weeks. So I think that Pakistan is in some ways representing the interests of those Gulf states in these negotiations. I think as well that the current leadership in Pakistan has tried to cultivate a friendship with the US. You know, they are part of this board of peace that Trump set up after the war in Gaza, that I think he anticipates may become almost a kind of United Nations. So, you know, the Pakistanis right now are in this administration's good graces, and that's really why they're playing this mediating role. Whether they can actually, you know, impress upon Tehran the need to make a deal, whether that is I think, the open question here. They certainly don't have the kind of leverage over the Iranians that the US does and that Israel does as well.
Ben, before I let you go here, is there anything else you'd like to add? I know we covered a lot of ground here, particularly when it comes to that breaking news from President Trump on Truth Social. Anything else that we should be watching here as these negotiations continue to unfold?
Yeah, I think the key thing is the war going to start up again? Yeah. Because it's clear that we've carved out a little bit of breathing space here, but that may not last very long. And as Trump has said, and as every member of this administration has said, there's always a possibility of a return to kinetic action and hostilities. I think the other thing to watch, and we haven't seen much evidence of it so far, is whether the Iranian people, who have risen up on several occasions in the last 15 years against this regime, whether there will be a point now where they feel they can revive those demonstrations. If they do, that could be in some ways, the best leverage we could have over this regime.
All right, Ben Cohen with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for joining us, as always, here on Live Now from Fox. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And we are going to step away for that 2-minute commercial break here on Live Now from Fox. Stay with us at 8:43 on the East Coast, 5:43 on the West Coast. We're back after.
All right, so as you heard just now from Fox News, Ben analyzing the current circumstances and basically saying that we are, as it seems, minutes or seconds arguably from starting the war over, seeing more kinetic action. Arguably, I would say it never was stopped. We just took the flames from 50% to maybe 20% down. So right now we are seeing a little bit of a calm and a little bit of a negotiation process. Of course, as we've heard, Trump is basically given again this the IRGC given them 2 days to decide or else, so to speak. In reality, we do understand that the IRGC is just not playing ball with the US, is not on the same page, whether it's with regards to the uranium negotiations, whether it's the overall regional geopolitical stance of the IRGC, Strait of Hormuz, of course, and so on and so on. So it seems like the two sides simply cannot agree, and I argue that they will not agree. And that's why fundamentally we can understand that what we're having right now is merely stalling and just postponing the inevitable, which arguably does serve Trump in various ways. But yet again, as we are seeing on the chart right here, right in front of us, the oil prices are extremely elevated. If you don't mind, real quick, I'm gonna bring back in my stochastic RSI overlay so you guys can follow up and understand better what it is that the stochastic RSI right there in the bottom is telling us in terms of momentum, where we are headed. So if we look at the 4-hour chart, which is within the digestible sort of framework of time for the near-term action, relatively speaking, we are already seeing the current upside, the channel. We are seeing how highly respected this channel has been. We have ridden this channel already since around April, and we are now sort of seeing again a retest of that bottom of the channel. Coincidentally, simultaneously, we are revisiting and testing a pair of a very strong support and resistance levels, which reside roughly at around 95, not actually roughly, pretty accurately, at 95.08 and 99.59, of course, roughly in that sense that we will see them being penetrated up and down. Still, as you can tell, throughout this entire prolonged period, we've been testing and revolving around these various levels. As we can track, we are seeing a descending sort of overall setup, in that sense that we are seeing lower highs we have been seeing, at least temporarily, lower lows. Of course, this leg is not yet done, so we are watching it closely to see where it's going to end up. We are seeing some level of downwards pressure, by the way. For example, if we pay attention to our hourly, on which we can now evidently see very clearly how very neatly that 95.08 level is being tested. We are, of course, seeing just recently a retest of that 99.59, which confirms the respect of the market and reality the market makers, because those who don't know what we are seeing in reality happening or coming through in the charts on the price action, these are the actions of the major players in the market. And if you know what you're looking at and have the right skill and tool set, you can have a reading into where we are headed, given the current setup and structure, cyclicality, and so on. Those who don't know, by the way, yes, I do teach technical analysis on a very professional level, because I've been doing this for many years now. And it's not just that I'm able to hit these support and resistance levels also perfectly, continuously, on and on and on and on again. Which, by the way, reminds me, boys and girls, I have a bit of a surprise for you when we will transition to the SPX. I actually have prepared for you the current support and resistance levels that we are playing within the framework of right now. And so you're going to have a little bit something to anchor yourself to, and not going to be completely lost in ether or discombobulated, if you will. And so what we're seeing right there on the hourly chart is a little bit of downwards pressure, a downwards channel, still testing these support and resistance levels. Arguably, we'll probably retest them for quite a while, given that mixture of bullish and bearish momentum on the various scales that are very close to one another, the hourly, the 4-hourly. So what are we kind of seeing going back and forth? We're seeing on the one hand some bullish momentum, some bearish momentum. So what we're going to get, basically more likely than not, is that mixture of leading to us sort of retesting or getting stuck again within the framework of these two levels that I've just mentioned, at least for the time being, for at least another impulse, so it seems. We may retest these for a couple of times. I tend to stretch my drawings out just for them to be visible and clear, but we still may end up retesting these levels a couple of times before continuing to the upside. Now, why, Greg? Why are you saying to the upside? Where is the confidence? Well, shouldn't this be, I mean, not enough to consider, because we're only looking at 4 hours? And although objectively this is becoming bullish, yes, we've just seen the bearish on the hourly. We also have the daily, which also plays a significant role within that framework, and it is objectively bearish. So we're kind of, again, seeing some level of mixture, that back and forth, which leads me to believe that for the short-term future, we will be seeing some stalling. In fact, we will talk about all the upcoming events, whether it's the Kevin Warsh's inauguration and what the Fed are likely or unlikely to do. Again, given the circumstances, we understand the Fed cannot cut rates, and their stance right now is to pause all actions for the near-term future. In other words, as I've warned before, we may see stagflation, which stagflation will overall, while simultaneously seeing more a stagflationary period, of course, we are seeing increasing inflation given the worse circumstances, the increasing oil prices. We already are at what would arguably be terminal velocity for oil to exit into its bullish segment, into its bullish channel, if you will, at least for the near-term future. Even though we are seeing some back and forth, we are seeing, when we transition to our weekly, we already are seeing that transition, and we see that most of our bearish price behavior kind of already played out. Arguably, it does not mean we're all done and good for, and you wake up tomorrow and you see oil skyrocket. Not at all. In fact, what we are simply seeing here is, again, a transition into more so predominantly bullish momentum. But since we are below the 50, as you can see on the a new overlay here that explains to you everything that below 50, although we say between 20 and 80 we are in neutral territory, but 50 is the range or the point within the range where we transition from more so bearish to more so bullish. In other words, what we are seeing is again a mixture. We are about to become bullish dominant and progressively sort of move higher within the overall framework, which probably leads us to retest that 99.59 or again the 100-ish level is near that vicinity. Again, it may end up being 100, 105, 110, 103, doesn't matter. Although 110 arguably is already quite prompting of the potential of 118 being retested, where we have a major technical support and resistance levels. This is where a resistance level, which is where I'm arguing that we are headed for another retest in the relative near-term future. At least once we see the forces, of course, converge, flip over, and become more so bullish when it comes to the smaller time frames, of course, subsequently spill over into what we're seeing here, become even more bullish when we will become bullish dominant on the weekly, and of course that will print on the price action itself, and so we will potentially see another movement to the upside, eventually leading up to a retest of 118, which we've seen before. You may call it 120, doesn't matter. Given how high we are and how these sort of ranges on oil affect profit margins for companies whose profit margins are razor thin. As you can imagine, a lot of these companies are right now struggling very badly. Some of them will have to hike prices, which kind of affects the whole chain reaction and web of reactions from one company to the other that eventually leads to more inflation to us, the consumer. It is a pretty simple equation that we are very well familiar with. Whenever oil prices go higher, we pay more at the store for everything, not just gasoline and energy. In general, we end up paying for all the byproducts, which, if you pay attention, everything around you has some amount of byproducts that are derived from oil. So, in other words, there are a lot of factors that appear to be very bullish for oil. Of course, we know our geopolitical issues that we've just watched Fox News report on. We know there's since been some new progress, and Trump is saying that the talks are, heading in a positive direction, although I don't know how much I believe that. The trick with what we do with regards to technical analysis, and the beauty of that, is that what it does, it shows us the underlying actions that the more powerful entities in the markets are doing right now. And usually these more powerful entities are far closer to the plate or the table, if you will, and they're far more aware of where and what sort of actions are going to be taken, and how these actions may affect the observer, the average Joe within the sphere of the stock market, and what sort of reaction, subsequent reaction we will see from the market makers. They are moving basically in tandem. They have the very same idea and understanding of how the market functions. In other words, when we are seeing the market pulling in a certain direction, that is us seeing the more powerful and in the know people taking action that results with technical facets that imply that we are moving in X or Y direction. So what we're seeing right now, and of course, as we are all very well aware of the inverse relationship of the stock market, the vastness of the stock market, the major indices, their tech derivatives and so on, not derivatives, they're sort of tech related, sector related, if you will, issue. The fact of the matter that the S&P and the Nasdaq are highly saturated with tech, and so they are highly intertwined, the entire tech sector, if you will, with the major indices, and the directionality in which they pull kind of goes in tandem. So what we're seeing right now, of course, on the more risk on assets, for example, Palantir, we're seeing a little bit more downwards pressure on the shorter range. Yes, I know what you just saw, of course, on the 3 months. We're going to get back to that in a second. As you can see right here on Palantir, we're moving downwards. Let me remove some of the noise so you guys can see better. We are moving downwards within a very distinct and defined channel. We have been doing so for quite a while, which I've been warning about. And so, as you can tell, the more risk on assets have a tendency to continue now with more downwards pressure. Yes, we are seeing that back and forth interplay. Again, we are now seeing a retest on the weekly, and that is why we're kind of stalling and spending more time within that framework. In fact, we may end up moving a little bit higher at some point, simply given the opportunity that has presented itself on Palantir. Irregardless, the further out we go, by the way, here is that opportunity that I'm talking about may play out right here on the monthly. We will see the directionality change, pick up a little bit, have a bit of a corrective sort of relief or kind of a rally, if you will, for this, which will misdirect everyone who are interested in Palantir. It will become another trap of sorts, while in reality the directionality of Palantir is significantly downwards, and we're now just getting started. People now have recently felt that, and so they think, oh, that's it, this is as bad as it can get, I'm sure we're gonna flip around. And that sentiment actually will play out at some point. As I said, the trap will make people start buying again, not realizing the overall trend is still going downwards. As you can see, we are in very bearish pressure now, with very large divergence between the two forces, which implies a continuation of the overall bearish sentiment for the upcoming months, which means we are about to hit the levels of 100 and maybe even 80-ish within the framework of the upcoming several months. Don't say I didn't warn you. I don't mean that's going to happen tomorrow, next week, or literally in the beginning of next month. No, that's not how things work. We are working here when it comes to the overall framework. We're looking at several months increments, and so we are now looking at more so downwards pressure than upwards. Of course, it does not mean necessarily right away. It means there is some fluctuations and ebb and flow within that framework. As we can see, the smaller time frames kind of that they indicate and show exactly what I mean, how that back and forth movement still results in an overall sort of perception on the larger time frames as it is a singular movement. So as you can see, we are already seeing on the risk on assets more preparation for more downwards pressure. Temporary retest for temporary levels that now play a role, but overall in the grand scheme of things, it appears to be that we're moving downwards. So we are already seeing some correlation when it comes to individual assets. Now let's switch over to the SPX. Yes, ladies and gents, I have checked and have gone through the analysis and have derived all the support and resistance levels that are relevant for us on the technical side of things, on the shorter range, if you will. Of course, we can see these levels, at least partially, that 7,251 already played a major role and was highly respected by the market, was acknowledged back and forth many times when we were entangled with it just earlier. And now, as we're progressing into the current framework of the support and resistance levels that we have right now, you can tell that we're actually testing 7,343.68. Those are the intermediate, or the intraday, if you will, support resistance levels that will play a role on the short time frame. Back and forth. But once we sort of look outwards and we zoom out, we realize our grand major potential resistance level currently, given the current structure, is 7,368.77, which I of course informed my community and Discord members about in advance, and I have said, in fact, let me show you how we may end up seeing that these levels being retested, if you will. Look at that. I've been warning how we've been sort of what we've been doing on the SPX side of things, where are we headed, and what may be the levels that may end up being retested. So you can see those are the very same levels, and I notified about this at the market open hours. For me, that's 4:30. And so, yeah, if we're looking at the current structure on the SPX and kind of gloss over the unimportant time frames, the little ones, the ones that show basically the little, the back and forth on the daily scale, and we switch over to the hourly, we realize that we see something very interesting. We're squeezing out our bullish momentum and about to shift over relatively soon. And so my assumption to how this gap will get filled in relatively shortly. Subsequently, we have the near-term range gap as well, generated roughly at around 7,237 and 7,203, if you will. The reasoning for thinking we're about to shift over, well, Greg, we're bullish still. Yes, as I said, we still may see a test of these levels, the 16180 level, which is right now 7,368.77. That level may end up playing a major role given its technical strength. And as we observe, we realize, oh, in reality, we are in a process, on the daily at least, on a process downwards. We are seeing some sort of curvature starting to appear here, which may indicate bullish momentum. That's why we're saying not necessarily as you're watching this, don't expect right away to see these gaps get filled, nor tomorrow. We are potentially looking into next week. Now, why do we think we're looking into next week? Because if we switch to the weekly, as I warned you all, yes, I did expect this convergence and confluence of the forces to happen a little bit lower, roughly at around the 50, meaning having this process shorter and, if you will, break down roughly at around the 7,177.58 or 7,159.51 levels, which are a major support and resistance levels. Those are basically, in essence, are a golden pocket of the Fibonacci retracement. Those who know what I'm talking about and how these things function and how to derive them, those were the levels. And so my assumption was that we will see a stalling of the price action, reinitiation of the war. Those of you who don't know, I'm here from Israel, and we actually are basically running around, walking around the last several days or week with the feeling that the war can start over any second now, literally any second now. And that's given the intel and information we're getting from our own government, military, representatives of the various, governmental entities. And given our experience and knowledge and understanding how the circumstance is right now is very unstable, and since we're a little bit more experienced than most of us are knowledgeable, I don't pretend to be some great general, but I am more knowledgeable than the average person, arguably here in Israel, most people are quite knowledgeable when it comes to military, because most of us have served at least in some capacity, or have, since we've lived here, we understand how these things play out. And since we've been playing ball with the entire region, if you will, for quite some time, and we know exactly how their strategies are like. And that's why we here in Israel have the presumption and assumption this whole peace talk thing is going to fail and break down, and it's just a matter of time. And Trump is merely stalling to take certain actions that are far more easier taken while having this pretend ceasefire. Why pretend? Because although temporarily on a very small flame right now, but still we have here in Israel having the war with Lebanon restart last week. It basically been in full swing. People have been dying, very unfortunately. And so everything that you consider to be an effect of the IRGC on the region, all their proxies are still doing what they were doing. And so, in other words, for us, it's business as usual. The only difference is that the center is not being bombarded on a daily basis from Iran because of that pseudo ceasefire. And again, I'm calling it pseudo because we understand that Iran is not going to come to an agreement with Trump or with America, if you will, simply because fundamentally the two sides are opposing in such a way that they will never come to an agreement, whether it's on the nuclear issue or on the overall control over the Strait of Hormuz, if it's just pretty much anything that the RGC stands for is pretty much 180 degrees opposing to what the U.S. Or America or Trump, if you will, stand for, nor the Western, civilization way of thinking. So it's just a matter of time, and these things until this bullshit, peace talks will break down, and we will see a continuation of the war, which will or is already being prepared for by the market makers. If you can tell, they are preparing for another move on oil higher, and that move subsequently was going to drive the last nail in the coffin when it comes to the major indices, and we'll start seeing a more so downwards pressure. So, kind of a little bit of a short, personal story. I had a close friend of mine give me a call and approach me about the stock market. As he knows, I am an expert in the field, and my expertise is within technical analysis, and that particular person is less interested in technical analysis, but oftentimes relies on my opinion. No, we're not talking about our beloved Tom Nash this time. We're actually talking about somebody else. And the call, in essence, started by, Greg, please tell me why the stock market is not crashing yet. And it was a whole lengthy discussion into slowly building this postcard, if you will, or picture of the current stock market and where it is at, and given the technical facets that could be simplified and explained for the purpose of explaining where we're at and where we're headed. Of course, considering the geopolitical scene. And the main question was discussed about, it's pretty damn obvious that the market cannot continue this way. It's pretty damn obvious the market is over, at crazy valuations and far overvalued, and in fact, significantly overbought. All the words were agreed upon, all of them, but then how? Why? Going back to the very thing that I told you guys that play the biggest role in the market are the market makers, are the other account managers, are the wealth funds that basically are on the opposing side. They are not just robotic, but rather reactive. And if they see that the average consumer, the retail trader, the average Joe, if you will, buys into the narrative, they will sure as shit, pardon the French, will drag it out as long as they humanly can. Now you'll go, Greg, well, that sentiment, it can be dragged out into oblivion and forever. Well, no. Even the market makers are under the very same rules of the technical cyclicality and technical structure, support, resistance levels, momentum, and so on. They just play into them when the opportunity presents itself given the structure. Yes, it is very unlikely and irregular for us to have a secondary high beyond the high that we already had. Those who understand the cyclicality and the structure understand how irregular that is, at least on that scale of things. And yet, it is not pattern breaking. For those who don't know what the pattern is and how it works and so on, I highly recommend joining my community while it is still on a discount. No, those prices are not the regular prices. They are now currently discounted. Become a full-fledged member. You'll have full access to our meetings, which we just had yesterday, by the way. A very good meeting. Or, of course, you can become a One-on-One Academy member. Not through this tier. I don't recommend. You can get a better discount if you simply go directly to my Discord, join in, and talk to me directly. I will, of course, then will give you, first of all, a better offer. And second of all, you will be able to sign up instead of being through Patreon, but directly through the Discord and myself. All right? Oh, no. I just got back home. Okay, sorry for that noise. Sorry for doxing you a little bit right there. That was not intentional. I just saw a message from you. I was wondering what's going on. Yeah, so for the rest of you who are still following and watching the video, I hope I was coherent and slow enough for everybody to get the idea of where we're headed. Those who don't know, I have this wonderful Discord where I keep my members informed on a daily basis, whether it's through charts, whether it's through various videos that I inform the members, that it's highly recommended for them to watch and be up to speed, especially during the weekends. Various discussions. Of course, we have the Academy segment, which you will be privy to once you become an Academy member or an Academy student. Here are testimonials from my Academy graduates, people who have graduated from the Academy. I highly recommend slowing down, pausing the video so you can read those and see exactly what the value of the One-on-One Academy is. And especially the biggest value you'll get, especially given the circumstances right now, is that you will be prepared and you will understand exactly why we're about to turn around in such a drastic manner, why we're headed towards 3,300 on the SPX, and why, even though it does not make any sense, we have been moving higher recently, although all the justification right now is pointing for us to move lower, which we will. And in fact, given the structure, I can tell you that right now it appears that we will be generating a lower low. Of course, it is very unpleasant for those who are waiting for the market to drop to see this occurrence happening. Remember, it is not the end and be all and end all words English. Don't forget I'm having a bit of a dental issue here. That's not the end of all things. We are just merely going through a very short period of a retest of certain levels that we were already aware of. Once these levels will be sort of retested and we will get rejected from them, we will see a major move downwards. And even though temporarily we saw an irregular move to the higher price point, it still does not break what the overall structure is, the cyclicality. I'm struggling to explain these things in simple words because it's almost like trying to interpret quantum physics for a 5-year-old. So that's why I highly recommend, instead of being in the almost know, make sure you join the community and you will actually be in the know and understand exactly what are the things that we're watching closely, to understand that even though we're having higher price points right now temporarily, it will still result in a more significant downwards trend, which will, of course, as you can see, given just the channel on the next move, potentially will result in a creation of the subsequent shoulder on the back end of things, which kind of resides roughly at around the 57, 58, 59 and 6,000 area. All right, ladies and gents, that's all I wanted to bring you up to speed about. And even though we are having some bullish price action, get ready, because things are about to become very, very, very bearish. Even though not right away, don't expect things to break down immediately the second you watch this video, but understand where the directionality of the overall cyclicality is. And as you can tell on the 3 months, we can see that we're just getting started. This whole thing is merely getting started. What we're seeing is more so the choppiness before we actually see the bearish momentum in full force. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. I know maybe it's weird for you guys not to have me in the bottom left corner right there. I'm having let's call them some technical issues with my teeth. And I just don't want to appear on camera right now. I hope you can understand. But this Sunday, Monday, as we're gonna we will be going back to normal sort of schedule. I will start appearing right there in the corner again. Forgive me for not being there at this time. That's it, ladies and gents. For my Academy members, I'll see you all tonight in the Academy meeting. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the trading session. But I want you to guys be realistic, just like my friend who I spoke with, who was very confused. And even my friend understands that the market cannot continue nor should continue this way. And we are far overvalued and are in for a major correction, ladies and gents. I'll see you on the next one. You'll have a wonderful evening. Bye for now. Don't forget to like and subscribe.